How Norway convinced Japan to eat salmon sushi. When hearing the word salmon sushi, which country comes to your mind first? Probably with many people, Japan is the country inventing salmon sushi. In fact, in the past, eating raw salmon was considered to be a taboo in Japan. In the mid-80s, it was Norwegians who persuaded the Japanese that eating salmon sushi was a great idea. The seafood market and fishing problems in Japan and Norway. Japan had a self-sufficient seafood industry in the 1970s. This country produced around 7 million tons of seafood. Annually, the Japanese consumed about 60 kilograms of seafood per capita, which was 45 kilograms more than the world's average. In spite of that, Japan still had enough fish to become a net exporter. However, the picture had changed dramatically in the mid-1990s, when Japan was only 50% self-sufficient and required new suppliers to meet the huge demand of its people. According to Bjorn Erik Olsen, director of the Norwegian Institute of Food, Fisheries, and Aquaculture Research, NOFIMA, and former fish attaché to the Norwegian ambassador in Japan, there were two main reasons for this. The first one is that Japan was overfishing its resources and no longer be able to fish in other countries' fishing zones. The second reason is Japan's complicated ocean system, which harmed the fish stocks. Norway also had its own problems with fishing in the 1980s when the Norwegian government was subsidizing fishing. Although they wanted to reduce fishing subsidies, they couldn't take them anyway. Otherwise, many people in the fishing industry would be unemployed. Exporting more Norwegian fish, especially Norwegian salmon, was considered as a way to both reduce government subsidies and support the fishing industry. After researching the world map, the Norwegians found a potential market: Japan. To widen the circle of friendship, a Norwegian parliamentary delegation traveled to Japan in 1974. Present as a member of the Shipping and Fisheries Committee, Thorle Sau, and the head of the Norwegian Trade Council in Tokyo, Hiroshi Niwa. After the trade delegation visit to Japan in 1974, Thorle Sau became inspired by the idea of selling Norwegian fish to the Japanese. Project Japan. Sau went back to Japan in 1985 at the end of his term as Norwegian Fisheries Minister. Accompanying him was 20 people representing Norwegian seafood exporters, ministers, and organizations. Sau decided to set up Project Japan, a government initiative which would boost the Norwegian seafood industry here. However, at the time, Japan declined the trade that Norway would sell salmon as sushi fish. The reason for Japan's actions is its people's traditional way of eating salmon. Japan had its own local type of salmon. However, as Japanese salmon carries a certain harmful parasite, people only eat grilled or cooked salmon instead of raw one. Consequently, no matter how hard the Norwegians tried to convince the Japanese that their salmon didn't carry any parasite and it was perfectly safe to eat raw, the Japanese just wouldn't listen. The Japanese only agreed to buy Norwegian salmon for grilling. As fish used for sushi has a higher value and is sold at a higher price than fish used for grilling, the Norwegians might sacrifice some serious profit if they settled for this compromise. As a result, instead of accepting the offer, the Norwegians insisted on getting salmon into the Japanese market for sushi making, even though they had all the extra salmon piling up. The Norwegians believed that they could just crack the Japanese sushi market and gain huge profits from their country from the salmon stocks. The breakthrough. The situation remained unchanged for years. Although the Norwegians kept trying to convince the Japanese to buy their salmon for sushi, the Japanese kept refusing. It's hard to change anyone's traditions and tastes, especially with a very traditional country like Japan. Consequently, the Norwegians' pitch about salmon sushi failed everywhere they went. Eventually, in 1995, after very long negotiations, a Japanese company agreed to sell frozen salmon sushi as a project in supermarkets. It began on a small scale, but it was the first crack in the Japanese sushi market that the Norwegians needed. Fortunately, this small project worked. The Japanese gradually started eating salmon sushi. No one got sick from eating it. It tasted good and children loved it. More and more people like it, and in just the next few years, Norwegian salmon was sold in sushi restaurants across Japan. Olsen, who was also responsible for market research for Project Japan from 1986 to 1999, said, "Everybody said we do not eat raw salmon. We had to really fight to introduce salmon into the market. It took 15 years from when the first salmon went to Japan in 1980 to the breakthrough for raw consumption in 1995. A total of 30 million was invested in Project Japan by the Norwegian government, seafood industry, and organizations. The funds were used for not only general campaigns targeting importers, distributors, supermarket chains, stores, and restaurants, but also individual campaigns. As a result, during 1980 to 1994, Norway had increased its seafood exports to Japan by 250%. Sales of Norwegian salmon to Japan went from around 2 metric tons in 1980 to 28,000 metric tons of salmon and trout in 1995, in which 5,000 to 6,000 metric tons were from raw consumption. According to Olsen, every good project has a portion of luck. In regards to timing, we were lucky. The Japanese market was a good market for seafood. Project Japan indeed owes its success to many economic opportunities. From 1960 to 1995, that the population in Japan grew rapidly resulted in the increasing demand for seafood consumption, while the Japanese fisheries industry declined and seafood prices were increasing at the same time. The project ended up having a profound effect on Japanese traditional eating habits. It not only opened new doors for Atlantic salmon to be rawly consumed in Japan, but also created a new trend of eating salmon sushi in other markets like China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. In 2010, China imported even more Norwegian salmon than Japan. Norway became the dominant exporter of salmon to China, 80 to 90% of which is for raw consumption. What do you think about our story about the way salmon became sushi in Japan? Let us know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more videos of health and nutrition.